So somebody told you backpacking was a good idea, huh? Stay tuned and I got some tips for you. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're enjoying the content so far, go ahead and like and subscribe down below. So this really isn't the video that I had intended on putting out. Last weekend I finally had the opportunity to get out in the backcountry and do an overnight backpacking trip. The weather was just perfect, the scenery was beautiful with all the fall colors coming into scene, and I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to be out in the backcountry. But unfortunately, my microphone had a component in the back that was a little bit loose, and every one or two steps that I took, there's a high-pitched metallic noise going on in the background. Welcome back, everybody. It's been a while. It's what, October 10th, I want to say, Saturday, and I'm finally back out in the wilderness here for an overnighter. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to salvage that footage and get a trip video put out. So instead, I wanted to do a tips video for new backpackers or people that are just looking to get into backpacking. When I first started backpacking, I had no clue what I was getting myself into. I had no idea what type of gear I should be buying, and I had no clue how to actually plan a backpacking trip. So I wanted to share some tips that I've picked up in my first couple of years backpacking, as well as some tips that I found from some other YouTubers out there, as well as some other online resources. So let's get started. Alright everyone, so for the first piece of advice that I have, I can speak on from personal experience, and that's take your first backpacking trip slow and easy. For your first backpacking trip, you're probably going to want to pick something that in terms of terrain isn't too difficult and isn't going to require you to do high mileage. The last thing you want to do on your first backpacking trip is try and bust out 10 or 15 miles on extremely difficult terrain and risk injury or just have an overall bad time because you're not enjoying yourself. So for those reasons, I do recommend picking easy terrain and something that's going to be a little bit lower mileage so you can try and focus on enjoying yourself out there, enjoying the backcountry and the scenery that it has to offer. My first backpacking trip, or major backpacking trip that I went on, we went up to the Manistee National Forest, and I think on day one we ended up doing about 10 miles, which was much more than any of us had typically hiked on a given day. And by the end of that day, we were just absolutely whooped. Our backs, legs, feet were absolutely killing us. And I remember the last 2 or 3 miles, we really weren't out there enjoying ourselves. It felt like it was really forced and we just wanted to be done. So again, for your first backpacking trip, don't overexert yourself. I highly recommend doing a trail that is a little bit less difficult and has lower mileage overall. So the next piece of advice that I have for anyone planning their first backpacking trip is to either make or print out a pre-made backpacking gear checklist, or a checklist of all the backpacking gear that you plan on bringing with you into the backcountry. A lot of great online resources out there. There's plenty of pre-made checklists out there. I have one here from REI. It's actually a 2-page checklist that's broken out into specific sections. Now I will say with these pre-made checklists, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of gear on there. A lot of stuff on that checklist I actually don't bring with me. It really depends on where you end up going, and a lot of it also depends on personal preference. But overall, it's a great starting point to make sure that you're bringing all of the necessities with you when you're actually packing your backpack for that first backpacking trip. I do highly recommend using a checklist while you're actually packing your backpack to make sure that everything gets in there, at least for the first couple trips that you go on until you really get your backpacking gear dialed in. Now, one thing it may not help you out with is that feeling of just forgetting something at home when you're leaving for your backpacking trip. Still, after 3 years, pretty much every backpacking trip I go on, I always seem to feel like I'm forgetting something at home, and I just can't shake that feeling, even when I'm using the backpacking checklist here. But overall, again, it's a great starting point to make sure that you have everything that you need to get you started in the backcountry. Another important piece of advice that I can give new backpackers out there is know the trail that you plan on backpacking. I have no idea where I am again. Now by this, I'm not saying that your first backpacking trip should be a place that you've either already hiked or camped before, but you should have done adequate research on this trail. And for me, that typically entails noting significant landmarks such as road crossings, trail intersections, and creek or river crossings. Typically I do this so that when I'm out hiking that trail, I can confirm and know that not only are we going in the right direction, but we're actually on the correct trail itself.
Well, we took our first minor pause, checked the map, and we went the wrong way already. So,
now another important note that I did just bring up there is water. You definitely should plan out or have a rough idea of where you plan on refilling your water when you're out in the backcountry. This is especially important if you plan on doing any multi-day trips. Obviously, water is the most important resource for us, and when you're out in the backcountry burning a ton of calories, you want to make sure that you're staying hydrated. So for those reasons, I highly recommend that you have a rough idea of where you plan on refilling your water before you get out in the backcountry. So last but not least, when it comes to planning your trip, I highly recommend printing out a physical copy of the map or trail that you plan on hiking. I typically do this for pretty much any trail that I plan on backpacking, and then obviously I also use my phone for navigational purposes as well. Now typically when it comes to the phone, I will download an offline copy of the trail or location that I plan on going. A couple apps that I typically like to use are All Trails and the Hiking Project. Those have been pretty good apps for me so far. Now with the phone, it is important to note though that there are some risks with using your phone as the only navigational device out there. Your phone can obviously die, and maybe you forgot to bring a battery bank or it's not working properly. Maybe you forgot to download an offline copy of the maps and you run out of cell service. Or maybe your phone either gets water damaged or you just lose it entirely. So for those reasons, I highly recommend that you bring a physical copy of the map just so you have a backup way of knowing where you are in the backcountry. I don't know if I would classify this tip as the most important or not, but it is definitely up there towards the top, and that's leave no trace. Now, if you've done any basic research on backpacking, you've probably seen the term leave no trace thrown out there before, but what does it actually mean? In my mind, leave no trace is pretty simple. It means that there should be no indication that you are actually out in the backcountry to begin with, maybe outside of your footprints. Now, there are some guidelines that can be followed in order to accomplish this. First and foremost is packing out all of your trash. So what I do, pretty much any food that I bring with me, I have a grocery bag that I also bring with me and strap on the outside of my pack. When I'm done eating any of my snacks, breakfast, or dinner, all that trash goes in that grocery bag, and then once I get back to the trailhead, I throw that bag away. I can't tell you how many times we've gotten to a campsite at the end of the day and there's just trash all over the fire ring or fire pit or even on the campsite, and it just makes me so upset when I see this. I'm not sure how people can actually live like that, but what I typically try and do as well is if it's small enough and I'm able to pack it out, I'll just throw it in my bag just to get it out of there. I really hate seeing all that trash all over nature. It's just really upsetting to see, at least for me personally.
Got to a really awesome creek crossing there. Really nice spot. Whoever was there in the past, though, left a whole bunch of trash, so thankfully I got my trash bag on me and it was small enough where I could pack it out. So, but it's kind of disappointing to see people leaving trash right on the right near the trail, right by a nice water source too.
Now, a couple of the guidelines that I do have: if you're doing your duty out in the backcountry, please go away from the trail. You don't want to be doing your duty right off the trail where people are hiking. One, you don't want people to see you, and two, if you are hiking out there, that's not something that you want to encounter or hike past. So I highly recommend going out about 100 to 200 feet away from the trail, and definitely away from bodies of water if you are near them, and make sure that you're digging a 6-inch hole at least. I've seen a ton of forums lately where people are just talking about how much toilet paper and stuff has been left in the backcountry, and it's just disgusting. So do your part. make sure you're digging a deep enough hole that it's not going to be dug up by any creatures or anything like that, at least 6 inches deep, and again 100 to 200 feet away from the trail or any bodies of water. Now, when it comes to keeping off the trail, the next item that I want to bring up is camping. Try and camp at pre-established campsites where the ground has already been disturbed. You don't want to camp somewhere where the ground is undisturbed. Try and reuse spots that have already been used in the past. Now, the next item when it comes to camping definitely differs based on where you plan on backpacking, but I typically try and backpack about 100 to 200 feet off the trail. You don't want to be obviously backpacking right on the trail where people run the risk of either running into your gear or tripping over it if it's late at night, and you definitely don't want to cause any type of traffic jam or disturb the trail itself. So again, if you are picking a campsite, try and pick a pre-established campsite if possible, and try and make sure it's about 100 to 200 feet off the trail or away from bodies of water. Alright, last but not least, when it comes to tips and advice that I have for new backpackers out there, and I have a couple here that I'll squeeze in together, they all surround backpacking gear. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about footwear. Now, if you haven't had a chance, a couple weeks ago I made a video about footwear that I'll link right up here, but I highly recommend that before you get out into the backcountry that you try out and break in any footwear that you plan on using in the backcountry. The last thing you want to run into out in the backcountry is issues with your feet, whether it's blister issues, soreness, or maybe a more significant issue like shin splints or tendinitis. You really want to make sure that the footwear that you've picked out is going to be right for you. Me personally, what I typically do is not only will I break in new footwear around the house, I'll typically do a couple day hikes, maybe 5 miles out in the trail, just to make sure that the footwear that I have is going to work out for me. Now, another important piece of advice that I have when it comes to backpacking gear is I highly recommend that you know how your gear works. You know how to not only set it up, but you know how to use it. You don't want to run into a situation where you're running into camp and it's a heavy, heavy downpour and you're sitting there for 30 minutes to an hour trying to figure out how to set up your tent for the first time. I highly recommend, again, that when you get a new piece of gear, that you actually open it up, figure out not only how to set it up, but figure out how to use it. This will definitely increase the chance that you're going to have a great experience out in the backcountry when you know how all your gear functions and how to use it. I'm not sure how I forgot probably the most important piece of advice that I can give new backpackers, at least for me personally, and that's enjoy the overall experience as a whole being in the backcountry. I know for me personally, I work a high-stress job. There's usually a lot going around on the home front here, so I use that time in the backcountry as a way to really unwind and just relax, enjoy nature, enjoy the experience being out in the backcountry while you're out there, and just soak it all in. It's a great opportunity to kind of unwind for a couple days and just have a really different experience where things are just slowed down from the daily stresses of life. So again, highly recommend if you are going out on a trip, try to enjoy yourself as much as possible and just have a good time out there. Alright everyone, well that pretty much wraps it up for the tips and advice that I have for new backpackers. If there's anything that I missed or you guys have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment down below and I'd be happy to respond back. If there's anybody that maybe just got done with their first backpacking trip, leave a comment down below and let us know how it was. I'd love to hear back from you guys. Again, if you guys are enjoying the content so far, go ahead and like and subscribe down below. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.